My name is Bob Roberts. I'm a pastor. I am an evangelical pastor. I'm not an angry evangelical pastor. I'm a happy evangelical pastor. I'll disagree with you. I just won't get ugly about it. But you know, we need to get to a point in our country where we can disagree and not get angry with one another. At the end of the day, we're all Americans. Amen? We're all Americans. And if we could let that be the big circle that we draw everything around, then there's a lot of hope for what we do. And so when Bill was putting this together, they were talking about inviting different people, and obviously to have both Ambassador David Saperstein, who was the Ambassador for Religious Freedom under President Obama, and then Ambassador Samuel Brownback, who was the Ambassador for Religious Freedom under President Trump. To have them together would be a great opportunity. And not just to hear them because of their position and what they did, but how they get along and how they're friends. So, and they're very different in many different ways in their personality and everything else, but they love and respect one another. And I've had the privilege of traveling with them at different places, speaking with them at different things, from the Pope and the Vatican to different entities. They've worked together in the past, but they're different, and they work together today. And I'm grateful for that. Does anyone else in the room beside me get hungry for an America where we can disagree, but we can love one another and just value one another? That's all it is. That's what I want it to be. And so they just don't represent different viewpoints where they would strongly disagree with one another, but how they treat one another with respect. Two things, and we'll get started. Hello, Dr. Hunt. Two things, and we'll get started that come into play that stand out in my mind with both of them. One was when right before Ambassador Brownback had been confirmed by the Senate. It was David and myself and Imam Majid were visiting Rohingya camp there in Bangladesh. And we went in and met, I don't know if it was the foreign minister or the prime minister, but some high-level foreign minister, high-level government leader in the country, and we were talking about what we saw. And David had been the ambassador for religious freedom. He knew this person, and this person said, well, we've got a new person coming. And I listened to how David handled that, and David's response was, you're going to love Sam Brownback. He's a great man. Yeah, we see things different in policy, but he's a man of integrity. He's a hard worker. He does things. You're going to really enjoy working with him. I just love that. Here's a liberal Democrat who's saying something gracious to a foreign leader about a Republican who's conservative. And that stood out in my mind. Another thing that stands out in my mind about Ambassador Brownback, we were in the car together, and we were at the Vatican. And he was talking to me about how he did bipartisan legislature when he was a senator. There was this one particular senator in particular, I can't remember his name, but they would do things together because they wanted to make a statement. And when he did the Earth Summit, not just the Earth Summit, it was the the first ministerial for religious freedom ever. And he did that, had a phenomenal response. Who would he have to be one of the keynote speakers but Nancy Pelosi? I would not have expected that in a million years. I thought, boy, that ain't going to fly. But he did. And what that said to me was, this is how we have to get along. Let one another speak, say what they need to say, but respect one another. That's what we want you to see today. And so, thank you for listening. I'm going to sit down and just going to ask a few questions. David is a Georgetown lawyer who studied primarily civil rights and deals with issues of religion and state. Ambassador Brownback and I are both future farmers of America and grew up in Kansas and has been governor, senator, ambassador for religious freedom, has run for president, among some other things. And so we're grateful to have them both that are here. So religious freedom really got its footing a little bit, not much, but with the ideology of the Magna Carta. And then it comes up in the early 1600s, about the time of Roger Williams and And that period where they begin to debate the whole concept of religious freedom and what that looks like. And then you have the Puritans come to America, and the idea of the Puritans was they wanted religious freedom, but for the most part, they wanted it for themselves. But Roger Williams said, no, we need religious freedom for everyone. So it's Roger Williams who goes to Providence, and which is the reason why the Jews at first went to Rhode Island. But he made strong strides with that. His writings are very extemporaneous, and there's a lot, but not very organized. John Locke takes those writings, tightens them down, a good bit of them, and from that, Thomas Jefferson leans on John Locke, and we get to where we are today. But in 1998, something significant happened in religious freedom, and it's what they call the Earth Act. David, tell us a little bit about that, would you? How did we get the Earth Office in 1998? Why was it necessary, and what difference has it made?
There have been some strange bedfellow coalitions after Oregon v. Smith was decided by the Supreme Court, sharply curtailing domestic free exercise of religion in the United States, and building on some of the relationships. So this left-to-right coalition that passed RFRA overwhelmingly in the Congress. Other entities began to really lift up the plight of religious persecution across the globe. And a number of senators and congresspersons decided that we had to do something about that. That of all of the basic human rights that America is often seen as the exemplar of affirming on the global scene, the one that by every country got the least attention was the least the focus of the international human rights organizations, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, got the least attention from regional human rights courts, got less attention from scholars who worked in the human rights field, was freedom of religion and the protection of almost always religious minorities who would be subject to persecution. And so in slightly different iterations, legislation was passed of the International Religious Freedom Act that created three major institutions. The first was the ambassadorship that would elevate this issue at the State Department. It was a great debate in the human rights world. Should it be a separate thing, or should it be integrated into the Human Rights Department? And that debate goes on in every country that's established their own effort to increase human rights. Don't favor human rights over other things. And we said, liberals like me, said, this is an affirmative action program. Again, this just isn't getting the protection by the structures that exist now. We need to do something to lift it up and bring it up to the level of other protections of human rights. So we did that by the ambassadorship, a fairly high-level appointment at the State Department, the creation of an independent watchdog entity called the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, a 9-person commission. I was blessed to be the first chair of that commission, also very diverse, from a liberal like myself over to John Bolton. That was a pretty diverse group of folks there. In the annual report that I'll talk about later, that lists up the religious freedom situation in every nation across the world. And in doing that, we really became a model for other countries that they had to take this protection of religious freedom more seriously. So it was really a bill, and there was a new senator who come in '96, just a couple of years before, from Kansas by the name of Sam Brownback, who played a very crucial role in that and a number of other vital religious achievements that happened over the time that he was there that did what this is aimed at doing, created strange bedfellows working together for the betterment of America, for the betterment of humanity.
I'm curious about this, if either one of you would know the answer to this. Bill Clinton started it. He's a Democrat. the first person to hold that office was Republican. He literally appointed a Republican, Bob Seifel. Why did he do that? Was there a reason?
A couple of observations. First, unlike the divisiveness of the domestic scene, created by the tension between how to appropriately balance religious freedom claims with other civil rights claims, both principles of the most fundamental nature in American life. And this is played out in the last 20 some odd years in a way that has increasingly divided America. And that's what this conference is aimed at addressing. On the international scene, there really had been bipartisan cooperation. The bill passed absolutely overwhelmingly in both houses of Congress. It was adopted by everyone as being crucially important, although I will acknowledge the energy came more from the Republican side and the conservative side. But it was embraced in terms of the intellectual framework of it, and really the need for it, and the basic principles of it all across the board. I think the second point is that presidents often think about Bill Clinton and Bill Cohen, appointed as the Secretary of Defense, a Republican, respected Republican senator from Maine. It is not uncommon that presidents want to say
will the Americans let this go? Because we're gonna crowd in on this stuff because this is the one thing that could stand up to government.
Let me ask you this, both of you were in office, actual serving, I don't think any more than 2.5 years. I was just, is that right? I mean, okay. Here's the thing that amazes me. That office was there, it was getting organized, but the truth of the matter, both of you men took that office to a whole different level. And you really weren't there that long when you think about it. I mean, in a very real way, you both have come to define that office. I know what I think they were, but David, what would you say? Here are the top 2 things that we did during my tenure that pushed it forward.
I took advantage of what I described before, the bipartisan cooperation that this issue has. It was passively there, I think, for our predecessors, but I conscientiously really worked very hard at nurturing that. So, for example, when I came in, we had, I think our program budget was about $2.5 million when I walked in the door. Our staff had shrunk under the person who preceded me at that time. And I worked very closely with people on both sides of the aisle. And I want you to just keep in mind, just as one of those leitmotifs of what this conference is all about. And indulge me, pause button for a second here. I just want to say how extraordinary this conference is. We need to have more of this across America. We really do. And I'm just awed by the quality of the speakers that you have at this conference. The legal speakers, the religious speakers, it really is remarkable. Just a shout out to Faith Commons simply because I know it the best. And they're being honored tonight, and George, and the extraordinary vision of that, and my very respected colleague, Nancy Kasdan, being here is special. And I have to give, with all the legal powerhouses here, the fact that Judge Griffiths is with us, who is such a formidable figure in the legal world. I hope everybody appreciates. And he came back here for a second year. I mean, if you want a compliment about something extraordinary here, I can't think of a more eloquent and compelling compliment. And I'm really humbled to be with him and with so many wonderful people here. But I really work with that bipartisan coalition. And in a couple of years I was there, our program money went from $2.5 million to about $25 million. It went up further under Sam, the staff. Altogether increased over 50% for us. Sam and it built so many new programs. He really took it to new heights. The ministerial, engaging in
now,
these
hold on, I'll come to that. What were the 2 big things you did?
Well,
what would you say?
That was it, really making use of that. And consider this, rather than going to a second one last word about that one. There isn't a single achievement that I can think of in America, I hope achievement defined by what would enjoy bipartisan support in this country. We're talking about the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the environmental efforts, the economic justice improvements in America. Not a single one in the 20th century happened except for a bipartisan coalition of decency on Capitol Hill. And we need that more than ever today, and it's what's falling apart. It represents the danger that America can be divided in ways that we may not easily be able to heal. And that makes what you're doing here so vitally important.
I want to ask you about 2 questions. Number 1, the round table. What was that? You started the round table.
No. Well, yes, the round table started actually even before I came in. It was nonprofit groups, NGO groups working in the area of international religious freedom and said, let's get together on a regular basis and talk of what's going on. And it grew during the time that I was there, but Ambassador Brownback actually handled it very differently than I did. He went as a regular, I went whenever I was invited. Every single time I was invited, I went there. He actually went almost to every meeting when he was in Washington. Both of us traveled enormously. In mine, 2+ years, I was in 35 nations in 82 cities across the globe on behalf of the United States efforts for international religious freedom. He nurtured this roundtable and helped give it the energy and direction and access to almost triple it in size from where it was when he walked in the door, and has continued to nurture it now into a global phenomenon in his work since his term.
So tell us about that, Sam. It has grown massively. What is it? How did you grow it like you did? And it now is global.
Yeah, and I think finally people started recognizing the real problem here. Almost every major genocide over the last 100 years is of a religious minority. And we never tied them together previously. You start with the Jewish Holocaust, just in this unfathomable situation. This is a religious minority. You can go to now the Uyghurs in Western China is a Muslim minority category. And go prior to them to the Tibetan Buddhist, who we haven't classified as a genocide, but it is. It is a religious minority. The Chinese communists loathe the Dalai Lama. They hate this man because he threatens them. You can go to the Rohingya in Burma. This is a Muslim minority in a Buddhist country. And you can even look to our own checkered past here towards the LDS Church and things that happened to them, or Catholics here, or Jews. I mean, you know, we're not perfect, and I never. I'm a proud American, but I mean, we've got our faults too. It's religious minorities. That's who takes it all the time. So if you're going to stop genocide in the world, you got to have religious freedom. You got to protect everybody's right to practice their faith. So I thought the big thing that we actually got started was a global grassroots movement for religious freedom. And it's religious freedom for everybody, everywhere, all the time. You can't exclude any group. You can't say it's just for this religion or that one. It's got to be everybody. But with that, it'll work. And now, and here's kind of the good sauce that I think is coming, you're starting to really see the Muslim countries in the world, the Sunni Muslim countries, at the leadership level, they're starting to open up to this truth. Because they've had, for decades now, just this: if you're not a Sunni Muslim, substantial portions of their society, we're willing to exclude you or kill you. And we'll do it. And they'd either just kind of look the other way, or it'd just happen. Well, they're looking at it going, with the future of oil being more questioning, we've got to open these countries up to be able to. We can't just kill anybody if they don't agree with us. And at the leadership level, they're starting to drive this more equal citizenship. Now, it's not everywhere, it's not everybody, but I'm pretty bullish that you're going to start seeing the world community look at this, saying, religious freedom, where you guarantee everybody's right to practice their faith, is going to be one of the key factors of whether or not you can have a global open society. This is going to be the toughest piece of it, honestly. Because these are also the things, you can use religion for peace, you can use religion for war. And we've used it a lot of times for war. But peace is harder. But we can do it. And that's what I think is just so really optimistic about what we can do, and also is a great potential for peril.
Yeah, it is true. And consider, in terms of what Ambassador Brownback just said, what America's contribution to the ideas that he is talking about has been. Before America, the rights that you had were rights that came to you by dint of your membership in some group or religious community, in a economic class, a political, the role of the status of citizen in ancient Athens. We were a minority of the population in ancient Athens. But the rights you had came from your membership in a group. And the state was the important thing. You served the state. The revolutionary ideas of America would have flipped the relationship of the state and the individual on its head, to argue that the rights we have come from within. We are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, and all the rights enshrined in our Bill of Rights. And to assert that the role of the state, was not to create those rights, but to recognize and protect those rights. If you ever have a chance to walk into the House of Representatives dining room, Ambassador Brownback served one term in the House before going out. Inscribed over the door are the words, "Man was not made for the state. Rather was the state made for man, and only by the consent of the justly governed does the state exist." It isn't attributed. You can test your member of Congress. It's a quote from Thomas Jefferson, representing this idea of what it means to be a human being, gives us these fundamental rights. But in the Constitution, God's not mentioned in the Constitution. He is in the Bill of Rights, but not in the Constitution, because that wasn't going to depend on religion. So though, trivia question, anyone know where in the Constitution God is mentioned? In the year of our Lord, at the very end of it, but otherwise it's not there. And the three provisions about religion, right? No religious test for office. No religious test should define your ability to participate in the government. Free exercise of religion, no establishment of religion. We created for the first time in the world this idea that your rights as a citizen would never depend upon your religious identity, your religious practices, your religious beliefs. A revolutionary idea. And it took us a while to really fulfill that, but in the mid part of the 20th century, the Supreme Court began to expansively interpret it, free exercise of religion, expansively interpret the Establishment Clause. Some in this room might disagree over that expansive interpretation, particularly on the Establishment Clause side, but that's what happened. And that dream was really fulfilled in a very significant way in America. It was at exactly that point that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was being written, and still at the high watermark of this, that the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, these international documents infused by America's interpretation of what freedom of religion meant, that guarantees you had the right to live in accordance with your religious conscience, so long as your rights did not infringe upon anyone else's. You had the right to choose your religion, change your religion, to practice religion you want, so long as your rights did not infringe upon anyone else's. That was an extraordinary gift. And that remains on the legal effort still a test for international religious freedom. Nobody's rights as a citizen should ever depend on their religious identity, their religious practices, their peaceful religious practices, their religious beliefs. And that is one of America's greatest contributions in terms of the history of the world.
All right, let me ask you this, David, and then Sam, I'd like for you to also pick up, if you don't mind. Something significant happened under your tenure, and then you built on it. Something called the Marrakesh Declaration. That was, some people point to that as we see the Muslims moving forward, because it was the document for religious freedom based in the Quran. How did that get started? And then, Ambassador Brownback, how did you build on that? Because you did, and I think it's led to some very significant things globally.
Well, the current ambassador, Rashad Hussain, actually played a very important role. He was at that time the special envoy to the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, 56 Muslim majority nations across the globe. they all Muslim majority, or some just have significant Muslim populations, I forget. Yeah, but it includes all the Muslim majority countries across the globe. And he helped nurture the application of the intellectual thought of a very remarkable figure, Sheikh bin Baya, who offered a very open, tolerant expression of Islam. In particular, what is the obligation of, in authentic Islamic sources, to treat religious minorities, non-Sunni minorities? And just historically, you should keep in mind that religious groups, let me just talk about Jews. In the main, Jews did better under Muslim rule, even though Jews and Christians were very clearly dhimmi, were second-class citizens, but they did better under Muslim rule than they did under Christian rule. It doesn't mean that there weren't more places where Christians actually defended Jews than our images are, but in general, that was true. He took this core ideas of the Islamic faith and put it into a formal declaration and got leading scholars all across the globe to decide at a conference in Marrakesh, in Morocco, that had its own long tradition of religious tolerance. It got captured the attention of the world. And then the question was, how do you get traction and actually do something about it? And that's where Ambassador Brownback comes in. So.
And so they started implementing it. It's one thing to say highbrow statements. It's another thing for the person on the street to experience religious freedom. And so that they've started pushing this. I think the Emiratis have probably led the pack on this. They did something that has never happened in the history of Christendom. The Pope was invited to speak on the Arabian Peninsula. He went into UAE and spoke there. And, I can sit in Kansas and look at that and go, so. But you go to the Middle East and you go, this is a huge deal. And then just last year, David and I were both at an event in Saudi Arabia where the head of the World Muslim League ushered into the room on TV camera the head of the Greek Orthodox Church, which is the first among equal the patriarchs of the Orthodox Church, with his cross on, with the camera showing, with the head of the World Muslim League walking him into the room in Saudi Arabia. Now, I can kind of sit and go, I could explain that to my wife or kids, and they go, Dad, I don't know why you get so fired up about these things. But, some of you that have dealt a lot internationally go, this is a big deal, dude. I mean, this is basically the home of Islam saying Christians can walk here. If I could do a backflip, I'd have done it there, because that's the opening that's taking place. It's also, for a Christian, this is the highest time of Christian persecution in the history of Christendom. Never seen more Christians persecuted than happening right now. Never seen more of them killed in places. And then you can see this grappling at the governmental level of governments that really don't want to deal with religion. Government, I'd say it's State Department, David might have a different opinion, but they really don't like religion. It just gets in the way of good diplomacy. But you're not going to get anything done unless you deal with religion. So that's why, to me, the Abrahamic Accords is a fabulous way to go. Acknowledge the religions, and you move towards peace in the Middle East. Have the religious leaders engaged on these things.
Without the Abraham Accords, without the Marrakesh, do you think we would see the progress that's being made right now in the Middle East? Or was that signs it was taking? How do you read all that?
I take it as signs as building, that you guys like what you were doing. Bob goes around the world and does these pastor and imams gatherings where they get to know each other. It's all, in our faith, we're called to love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and flesh, and our neighbor as ourselves. And our standard in religious freedom has generally been tolerance. Well, as a friend of mine pointed out, that's not God's standard. Tolerance, I can tolerate you today and tomorrow be willing to kill you. But if I respect and love you, I've got a relationship here now. And that's where I think really what we've started to see is some of these relationship buildings moving to you've seen smoke coming, and now we see a little open fire starting.
So
Good fire.
if I can just offer a couple of observations to what you're talking about that I think you share, maybe not quite the same way that I do, but I'm trying to offer an additional realpolitik analysis of this. First, let's be clear that some of these countries we're talking about still have profoundly serious problems. Saudi Arabia remains a great persecutor of religious minorities, Muslim minorities, and other minorities in the countries. They can walk in the street, but they can't do anything religiously. They can't have houses of worship. They can't celebrate their holidays. Still, it was a remarkable moment when we were there for the first time on live television. They saw very prominent religious leaders from across the globe gathered together in Saudi Arabia and saw that. But as I pointed out in my remarks, there wasn't a single person from any of those same religious traditions from within Saudi Arabia who was at that table. And that has to be the next step if this is going to really get traction. Secondly, there are times where there are tensions between human rights and religious freedom, where advances may be made on religious freedom. Think of Al-Sisi in Egypt, who's done some good things in terms of religious minorities compared to prior leaders there, but is just terrible on human rights issues in general. And while the UAE has done some remarkable things, there are serious human rights problems that continue there as well. It's not easy navigating this when you're in the diplomatic corps. You know, do you celebrate the good things, and it may be seen as giving your imprimatur to a country that actually is doing deeply problematic things in other areas? Or conversely, if they're really bad on religion and they do some good things in terms of freedom of speech or freedom of the press, I mean, do you celebrate that, knowing they're persecuting religious groups? These are real life things that we have to deal with all the time. And they can be very, very challenging in terms of trying to figure out what is the most effective way of doing it. And very often when we go to help the, quote, moderate religious forces, and they're trying to win the hearts and minds of people in the street, our embrace, whether the hour is America's embrace, or Western Europe, democratic countries' embrace, or Christian embrace of Muslim minorities, or Muslim embrace of Hindus, or some, is often used by the very people we're trying to isolate as extremists to delegitimize the people who we've thrown our support for, saying, see, they're agents of the U.S., they're agents of Western secularism, they're agents of Christian evangelicalism, evangelizing and conversion efforts, etc. That requires a sophistication in terms of navigating how diplomatic we can work to strengthen forces of moderation. And by the way, moderation has nothing to do in the way I'm talking about it in terms of theology. I don't care if you're fundamentalist or liberal. The question is, are you an extremist? Are you willing to use force to impose your religious views on others? That's where you should draw the line. So long as you let people make their own decision, even if you're fundamentalist, here you're within the moderate category of how I'm using that term. And, trying to figure out how to help those people, those segments of those communities without delegitimizing them at the same time is a central challenge for effective diplomacy.
One other thing, Ambassador Brownback, I wanted to ask you about your tenure. You did something that was profound that also pushed things globally. I would say to a new level. You did a ministerial. You did 2 ministerials. What were those? Why did you do them? And why do you think they've been so impactful?
Ministerial is where you bring together foreign ministers from around the world on a topic. And there had never been one before on religious freedom. And we did two of them. Secretary Pompeo was there, Vice President Pence came as a part of it. In one of them, we had a group meeting with President Trump, people persecuted meeting with President Trump, and that one got out of hand. But I mean, this is a sidebar, but it's kind of funny because this is the way Donald Trump operates. I've been in the Oval Office, I've been with presidents for. Everything is staged and choreographed. I mean, it is just, okay, this person enters at this time, this person leaves then, and all presidents are used to being handled. Okay, these are handleable people. You move him here, you move him over there. Well, President Trump's not used to being handled, and he's not handleable very well. And I say that as a loyal Republican. So we bring these 15 people in that have been persecuted for their faith from around the world, and there's Buddhists and Muslims and Christians and all. And so they're around him, they're taking a picture of the president, we take the picture with the president, and then the president says, well, why don't we bring the press on in? And I'm kind of going, wait a minute, you don't know what these people are going to say that are right here behind you. But I'm kind of, well, I mean, it's his show. So the press comes in, and they get pictures of the president with all these different people being persecuted, and it's going pretty well. I'm thinking, okay, it's going to make it. And then, boom, just sure shooting. The lady from Tibet pipes up and says, Mr. President, the Tibetans are being persecuted by the Chinese. And the cameras are all right. I mean, they're on that. And I'm sitting there going, I know right now in Beijing, people's heads are blowing up. What is this Tibetan lady doing in the Oval Office saying this to the President of the United States? And then, well, of course, it's popcorn then. She says that, and then the lady that got persecuted in Eritrea pops up over here, and then the lady from Bangladesh says, this is what happened to me, and the press on each of it, and the President's going, yeah, okay, yeah. And then I go to step in thinking, okay, we've done enough damage here today. Mr. President, you got a helicopter to catch? And he goes, no, I want to hear some more. Fine with me, hey, I don't need this job. I'll go do something else. And of course, the lady from Bangladesh has not been able to go home since, because she became an instant phenomenon in Bangladesh of her bagging on the Bangladesh government. Her family was run out. It was terrible for her. But I mean, she said true. She was a Hindu lady in a Muslim country, and they were being persecuted. And everybody else survived. I survived, but I just thought afterwards, either this either went great or it will never happen again. And anyway, that was a long story.
So let's do this. We've got 3 minutes. So I'm going to give you both a minute and a half. I'm going to start with you, Sam, and here would be the question. When you look at our country right now, where we are, what you've seen around the world, what would you say, what difference does this make to us right here in Dallas, Texas? And you've got a room of Christians, Muslims, Jews, all kind of variety of Christians and Muslims and Jews, even among us. What would you say? So here's the so what. Here's what we need to be mindful of right now. Here's how we bring it home to where we live.
If what happens here affects the rest of the world, and when we stand in front of God at our final judgment, we're going to have to say, did I do everything I could do to help other people and do the right thing? I don't know if we realize how privileged we are and what a responsibility that privilege carries with it. And this is the most powerful nation on the face of the earth. Everybody else watches here. And if you want to, you don't have to do a darn thing, and you can go home and eat bonbons all day, and then you can do that. But at some point in time, we're held responsible for the opportunities that we have, and we're responsible to see that those people that are being persecuted in all sorts of places around the world, and they're in little huts somewhere right now, praying to God, lift up this persecution for me. We're responsible. Because we've got a chance we can do something. You can raise this to your representative. A lot of you know your congressmen or senators. You're politically connected. You can do. A lot of you know the corporations that are operating in these places, and they have supply chains that are doing things that they should not be doing. You don't have to do a darn thing. But at some point in time, we will be held to account for what we do or what we don't do. And we're privileged. I'm privileged. And I'm scared sometimes. I'm not doing enough.
So, first, on the ministerials, I had worked with John Kerry, who was secretary for a long time, and Tony Blinken was deputy secretary. These were people there is no way on earth I could have pulled off creating a ministerial. It is such a tribute to Sam Brownback that he had the respect, the clout, the access to be able to actually pull the entire system of the State Department behind a foreign ministerial level, raising the awareness across the globe about this issue. It was really something remarkable, Sam, and we're all in your debt for your leadership on doing that. Here, so what can we take from this experience? We really differ with each other deeply and profoundly on a lot of the social issues, on a lot of the economic justice issues, here on some of the environmental issues, agree on others. Here, we have profound differences. We even have profound differences you picked up about religious freedom versus some of the human rights and how they ought to be thought of together. And some of the issues that we have divisions on that are the divisions that are being debated here domestically exist internationally. But we have enormous respect for each other. I always defend Ambassador Brownback's right to be wrong. Seriously, we, and I don't just mean he and I, the enterprise of international somehow has reached a level of comedy and cooperation that says there are times we put aside some of these profound differences we have to achieve something that is absolutely indispensable for humanity's sake and for the interests of America. That's a lesson we need today. We're living in a moment that we feel the possibility of this nation being torn apart. And we may not be able to heal it again. We see the escalation of hate crimes, of anti-Semitism, of Islamophobia, of hate speech and hate crimes proliferating across the globe, affecting many nations. And when we have see hate crimes here and attacks on houses of worship of any kind, the purpose of the people or the perpetrators is to tear America apart. It's not just an attack on the people they kill or the survivors of those people here, but of everything that America stands for, e pluribus unum, out of many one. And the fact that we somehow have managed to negotiate that on the international level is a model that it is possible to do, to find common ground and lift up that common ground, to work together in a way that we learn to trust each other. Here, because when you work across political and ideological and religious lines, and you work for a common good, you really build levels of trust. The presentation we heard before dramatically showed how indispensable trust is in terms of comedy amongst people. You get those levels of trust. And it's hard. It's hard to do this, to give up things that are essential to you, or put them aside for a while. But God knows we need it more than ever now. Because if America doesn't make it, democracy is gone on the global scene. If America doesn't make it, religious freedom is gone on the global scene. If America doesn't make it, human rights is gone on the global scene. Freedom House tells us from the end of World War II to 2006, wars and revolutions might change, but the midpoint of the growth of democracy and human rights was unbroken all the way until 2006. And from 2006 to today, that midpoint is reversed across the globe with the growth of autocracy all across the globe and the strains about democracy. So if ever there was such a time as this, for this kind of conference to take place, to say that what we're able to achieve on the international level is needed domestically more than ever today, it is this moment of time. So go forward with courage, because yours is an awesome agenda here to find common ground on these issues. And I hope that you will be successful in everything that you're trying to do.
very much.